So later this year, it will have been 5 years since I started speedrunning Scooby-Doo Night of 100 Frights and completely obsessing over the game. And between speedrunning and now modding, during those 5 years, I have gathered a lot of useless, super obscure facts about the game. So I thought, why not make a video and share some of these? I'll start off with some of the more well-known things I have in here, and work my way up to the more complex stuff. But a lot of these facts are just things that I found out on my own, so you probably won't know the majority of these. With that out of the way, let's get into fact 1 out of 74. In this section of Skullcliff 3, there was supposed to be crabs moving around on top, but the developers placed them slightly too low, causing them to fall through the floor and move around out of bounds. And that's not the only thing out of bounds in this level. There are 2 falling platforms placed way below the map, which seem like they were meant for you to reach this button, but since they're placed incorrectly, you need to use the umbrella instead. Some projectiles don't appear on the pause menu, like Black Knight's axes, or the wooden shards after breaking something. There are some quirks with a few of the cutscenes in the game, such as on PS2, the game renders the cutscenes in real time, so on certain days of the year you can actually see the special effects in the first cutscene, like snow or different color smoke, but on other versions they're pre-rendered, so this doesn't work. Also, on PAL European GameCube releases, they forgot to trim out a part at the end of the first Black Knight cutscene, which shows Scooby respawning at the start of the level.
Watch out! It's the Black Knight! Oh no!
So this looks pretty jarring in-game, and the Xbox version's cutscenes look the strangest, as they are both pre-rendered and have some strange black bars on the screen during some of them. You may know that on Halloween, the game will spawn in bat objects into the hub, but what you might not know is that there's a pretty hidden bat behind this tree over here, which is hard to notice because of the camera angle. On the Xbox version, this wall in Upstairs 1 is just completely missing, and you can walk out and die and it's not there. The music track for Shock on the Dock Part 1 is based off of the intro theme for the new Scooby-Doo movies show from the 70s.
For you, couldn't have a show without ya. Scooby, Scooby-Doo, Scooby, Scooby-Doo.
In adverts and trailers for the game, including the images on the back of the PS2 box art, they all show a beta build which has completely unused mechanics, such as a life system where Scooby collects collars to gain lives, and a different health bar, which is just a long sandwich at the top of the screen, which gets smaller when Scooby loses health. And unfortunately, no playable builds of this version have ever leaked, so all we know about it are from these trailers. In the cutscene after defeating Black Knight, we can see Professor Alexander Graham on a TV screen standing in front of some potions. But if you look closely, you can notice that this is actually the beta version of Lab 1 from the trailers that I just mentioned, which means that this cutscene was likely first made when that version was still being used. When entering the level Crypt 1, the game shows you a cutscene that has a ghost floating around at the top section of the level, but when you actually go up there, the ghost seems to have disappeared. But if we climb this chain in an unintended way, we can see that the ghost actually floats up to above this chain for some reason. In this hallway in Mine 3, there's a sandwich in the corner which can't be collected, as it's blocked by an invisible wall. In the Mystery Machine hub, in front of the fountain, there's a disabled trigger left over from when the developers were testing the game, that would bring up a UI that lets you teleport to the first level from every area in the game. This would be great for speedruns of the game if it were possible to activate, but there's likely no way to do so. The creeper that jumps out of the painting in Climber 2 moves so slowly that it's actually difficult for him to attack Scooby, and instead ends up just pushing you around. Outside of the skybox in Crypt 2, there is a large wall for some reason, despite the fact that players will never see this. Some levels in the game contain a moon, and most of them just have a 2D white circle in the sky to simulate a moon, except in Hill 1, where the moon is half of a 3D sphere for some reason. You can very easily crash the game by pausing while digging a flower and then quitting the game. In Redbeard's quarters, he has two real maps on the wall. One is mirrored and has a sword marking the United Arab Emirates, and the other I think is marking Turkmenistan. This destructible wall in Creepy 2 accidentally shoots out pink spheres instead of the usual wall debris. On both the PS2 and Xbox version, there exists two beds out of bounds in the level Mine 3, which you can reach by clipping through a corner with the D-pad, and these were both removed on the GameCube version. But that's a pretty well known fact. What you might not know is that one of these beds is named as Canopy Bed, but doesn't look like a canopy bed. Well, there's actually an unused bed model in the files of this level, and if I apply it, then you can see that it is actually a canopy bed, so I imagine this was the original model for this object. Something else about this area is that there's actually a carpet next to the beds, which is set as invisible, but does still have collision. And they forgot to remove this on GameCube, so it's possible to land on this invisible carpet on all versions with enough trying. Sometimes when landing while using the umbrella, Scooby appears upside down for one frame. This is pretty unnoticeable during regular gameplay, and can only really be seen if you pause perfectly. It's common knowledge that on some days, fireworks will occur in the game, but for some reason, on August 28th, the fountain has multicolored water, and I don't know why. In Gust 1, there is a sandwich out of bounds, which can't be collected because as soon as you get close, the game detects you are in the void and warps you back to the start. These two Funland robots in Lab 2 are supposed to walk around in a square on the pathways above, surrounding the middle area, but they accidentally spawn the robots too far to the side, causing them to walk off the edge and get stuck in a corner. Certain sections of the game are controlled using an out-of-bounds object. For example, the infamous coffin sections of the game, which randomly picks one correct coffin, is chosen by an out-of-bounds model of Scooby's collar, moving between one of 4 points. Similarly, in Lab 2, this electricity which turns on and off is controlled by an out-of-bounds Scooby snack. And no, I know what you're thinking, it can't be collected like a regular Scooby snack. In Aghast 2, there are 2 ice blocks at the same position floating way above the level, which are both invisible in-game. Their purpose is unclear, but might have something to do with managing sound effects. They do still have collision, so it's theoretically possible to stand on them, but there's no known way to reach that high up. The disc for Scooby-Doo Unmasked and Scooby-Doo 9100 Frights actually have the same background. The Mystery Machine hub will play sounds for crickets chirping and wind, but only the first time you enter the level. Every other time will lack these sounds. There are some very minor differences that happen depending on if you move with the D-pad or the control stick. Usually when swinging on something, Scooby will lift his legs up when you move, but if you move with the D-pad, Scooby's legs remain down. The camera will also move very slightly to the left and right when you use the control stick, but this does not happen with the D-pad. It's hard to see in usual gameplay, but much clearer when Scooby's stuck in a wall, like this. In some specific levels, the devs actually realized that an enemy can reach an area that should kill them, so they added unique events to make that happen. Such as in Aghast 2, if this caveman touches this invisible trigger on the water, then he will die. Or if this creeper falls down this pit in Climate 2. But in most levels, they don't account for this. If you're fast enough, you can jump over the water that rises in Which Way, as it's only a moving square of water instead of filling the entire cave. It's also possible to lure the sea creature down and get the water to cause it to clip into the ceiling. On just the North American PS2 versions, Mine 2 and 3 have a different font for the press circle to enter text. Scooby's skidding move seems to only slow you down, and have no real use for the player, but there's actually a very practical way to be able to use the skid to skip certain parts of a level. During Scooby's skid animation, he's able to jump twice, and there's no check to see whether Scooby is grounded or in the air. So by charging onto a surface like a trampoline, and intentionally letting go in order to skid in the air, you can then double jump and reach some far areas really easily. Have you ever realized that you've never seen the professor's feet? That might sound like a strange question, but there is a specific reason that the developers never used the professor in any way where you could see beneath his legs, since his model has 2 broken feet. In Cellar 4, you can mistakenly turn the door on this first dryer an infinite number of times, while the rest of the doors can correctly only be turned open once. It's possible to respawn some enemies that you aren't supposed to be able to. For example, you can sneak up and break these boxes in Attic 4, and then sneak back out to spawn the cavemen without hitting their trigger. Now if you kill them and go back to where their boxes were, you will hit their trigger and they will come back to life and jump out of thin air. Behind the exit door of Dark and Stormy 1, there's actually a texture of the next level on it. But this is never seen in game, as the door doesn't even open. After you watch the first cutscene for the Mastermind boss fight, you can't see it in-game, but the gang outside the arena physically run to the right before despawning. One of the boats that you jump on in Coast 3 doesn't fall. This is because the developers accidentally used the event Stop Moving instead of actually running the platform. When Scooby skids, there's always some sort of particle effect. The only surface in the entire game that I know of which doesn't create any particle effects when you skid is the fountain in the hub. There are some unused voice lines left over in the Mastermind boss level.
Knock knock. Who's there? Weston. Weston who? Rest in peace, Scooby-Doo. I wouldn't want to be in your shoes now. No, wait, I mean paws. No, that doesn't sound right. Let me get back to you. Since I can't throw you in a pound, I thought I'd pound you instead.
The metal circle at the center of Lab 3 is actually a scaled up version of the model from the back of the warp gate, just without the wires. Even stranger is that there is a smaller version of this hidden inside of the larger one, which can never be seen in game. There's a minor visual error on the back of the Xbox and PS2 box arts for the game. Do you see that small pink box thing? Well, I think that's actually the tip of Daphne's shoes, or at least some part of Daphne's clothing, that they accidentally overlaid above the image of the game, and they do fix this on the GameCube box art. For some reason, there's a big invisible box in the middle of the tower level, which gets turned on and off depending on the current camera, so if you perfectly enter it and change the camera at the same time, then it's possible to get completely stuck. In Shock 2, if you ground pound the floor whenever Shaggy is stuck swinging, then he detaches and falls down, despite the fact that this is only possible with cheat codes, as you can never regularly get the Super Smash power-up without solving this puzzle first, so I have no idea why this is a feature. On every version of the game other than the GameCube, the Mystery Machine has special surfaces for some things, such as the grass creating grass particle skid effects, the creeper's shadow moving along this window, and lastly a very obscure surface for the wood in front of the doors, which create a slightly quicker and darker skid effect. However, on GameCube, none of these surfaces are mapped to the level, despite still existing in the files. I think the devs porting this may have just forgot to add these back in, since I was able to edit them back in without much issue. In Gust 2, there's a big fan and a smaller fan, and internally, the names for the sound effects for these fans are called Big Ass Fan and Small Ass Fan. The tar monsters in both Pier 2 and Pier 3 appear to have a mistake, where they periodically leave their slither animation and freeze for a second before continuing to move. In the Redbeard boss fight, you defeat him by cutting the ropes and crushing him with a chest. But it was very likely that you originally crushed him using an anchor, Since there exists an unused anchor model in the level, and a lot of the assets relating to the chest have anchor in the name, like the counter which determines if the chest is ready to drop is called anchor fall, so I'm not sure why they changed this. It's theoretically possible for Scooby to grab Shaggy after throwing him by standing above him, but this can only happen in very specific glitchy scenarios, such as lag clipping Shaggy through the floor in Creepy 2 and then going above where he clipped. The manual for the PS2 version contains screenshots of not the beta build from the trailers, but instead a much similar build to the actual game, with only some minor changes, so likely only a month or two before the final release. Those changes are different snack placement in Shock 1 compared to the final. On the map, Pia says it has 192 snacks total, but in the retail release it has 202. And lastly, there is straight up no warp gate in the Mystery Machine. On just the Xbox version of the game, each boat in Aghast 1 has 5 invisible walls placed in front of them to try and stop Scooby from clipping halfway inside, which can happen sometimes on other versions. But these invisible walls aren't perfect, and can cause some weird interactions of their own. Mastermind's panel actually animates during the fight, but it's impossible to see from above because of the camera, and it can only be seen from below if you're paying really close attention. You can make these witches in Attic 3 respawn as much as you want by entering this camera trigger and then going back. Like in Attic 3, the witches in Mine 2 also both respawn each time you touch this camera trigger after the moving door. After you open this gate in Creepy 2, this zombie has a unique trait where he will start sprinting up and down the hallway as if he was chasing Scooby. This is intentional, and happens because the zombie is sent a Vil fake chase on event when the gate opens, which puts him into the chase animation. There's an unused platform inside of one of the cauldrons in Creepy 2 called Flame 1, which if activated, would have jumped upwards into the air and then back down, and presumably hurt Scooby if touched. I think this is some sort of unused cauldron effect, since it's colored green, like the cauldron, and has a model called cauldron_bubble. There's a whole cutscene sequence which exists in Creepy 2, but isn't played since it's not enabled. I'm not sure if this was an oversight or they just decided not to include it. Sneaking past enemies does not work in any of the boss rooms, even on regular enemies like the tar monster or the witch. The only exception is these urns before Green Ghost, which do check whether or not you're sneaking. Each version of the game handles snackgate sound effects differently for some reason. When you don't have enough snacks on PS2, it plays this high-pitched sound and then plays a light spinning sound. On GameCube, it seems to randomly play either just the high-pitched sound, or a louder, more metallic spinning sound. An Xbox only plays the metallic GameCube spinning sound. Have you ever noticed that in the hedge and hill levels of the game, Scooby's footprints and skid effect create unique particles? Internally, these particle effects are referred to as snow, so it's very likely that most of these levels were snowy at one point in development. There's other indicators this is true, such as unused snowy versions of the hedge textures in the files, and there's even an image of the beta online which shows a snowy version of Hill 3, and a clip from one trailer which shows a much icier cave entrance, also in Hill 3. Some of the information inside the manual for the Xbox version is straight up wrong. Like on the controller mapping section, it says that the X button can do head smash / super head. What is super head? I guess this is referring to the helmet, and sure, they could get away with that. On other manuals they at least call it the super head smash, but sure. Yet then they say that you can do umbrella smash and thunder smash with the A button. And the A button is only used for jumping. So I don't know who wrote this. I think there's meant to be text which says A and then X before it says smash, but they just forgot it. When you first turn off the electricity in Lab 1, the floor texture will mistakenly remain electrified on only the NTSC GameCube versions of the game. This is because they removed a texture needed to make it work, and now mistakenly set the new texture group to one which has nothing in it. The PS2 save icon for Night of 100 Frights contains a different, lower poly version of Scooby. It seems they might have also intended to include a small animation where Scooby eats a sandwich, since there's clearly a sandwich part of his texture that goes unused, but instead they just have an animation where he taps his foot. The Funland robots in Lab 3 actually spawn in by riding down on a platform for some reason. It's pretty hard to notice usually since it happens so fast, but you can catch a glimpse of it happening during the cutscene, and also if you run over to them quick enough. In the 2006 Wii game Flip's Twisted World, the main theme is actually a remix of the Shock on the Dock 2 music from Night of 100 Frights. On NTSC, PS2, and Xbox, you can walk on the water above the shark tank before Mastermind. This is because there is a test trigger accidentally left enabled, which turns the water's kill surface off while Scooby is inside, and this trigger is right over the tank. This was fixed by disabling the trigger on GameCube and PAL PS2. On only the GameCube version, you can rotate Scooby in the monster gallery using the C-stick. In every other level, the C-stick does nothing, but here it lets you slightly move Scooby's direction each time you move it. It's probably like this to make the C-stick work with the picture gallery UI in this level, but the issue doesn't happen on Xbox or PS2, so I don't know why it isn't the same here. Landing on this boat at the end of a Gas 1 will respawn a witch on the previous boat for some reason. This is completely pointless, as Scooby can't get back to this boat once at the end. Landing on this boat in Agast 1 sends the witch on it an event to go into patrol mode, in order to cause this interaction where the player lands and the witch flies over to them. But since we know this, we can repeatedly jump on the boat by leaving the ground for a few seconds, and then landing, to force the witch to constantly go into patrol mode and never be able to attack us. This witch in Agast 2 has an event attached which doesn't work. It's supposed to patrol when woken up, where she would then continuously bounce up and down in between the two columns outside. However, the witch can't be woken up, as she doesn't begin asleep, and even if she did, Wake Up Villain is used to wake up enemies rather than start something after an enemy is awoken. I also think this is probably how they intended you to get the Redbeard token originally, by soaping the witch. In Misbehavin' 1, there are 12 unused move points on the top path, labeled to be for a witch, so it seems as if they originally planned for a witch to move up and down this path as an extra obstacle. This is what it would look like if the witch did exist. You can super smash this railing in Upstairs 2. This button in Coast 2 is supposed to turn off the surface underneath the crates that kills Scooby. But there's actually two surfaces in the level with very similar names, and they accidentally turn off the wrong one, meaning that although stopped, these crates can still kill you if you jump into them. On only the PS2 versions, you can leave the tank in the shark room without Shaggy by jumping on these blue pipe things, and then if he's close enough, you can grab him through the wall. This on its own is cool, but there's something else unique about this Shaggy. After you save him from the shark and the water, the game activates a special Shaggy targeting event called Shaggy1_throw target, and this is usually to prevent Shaggy from being thrown out of the tank. But Shaggy is never supposed to be able to get hit during this state, so by doing this glitch to let Shaggy escape, we can see that when hit, he will launch across the room to get back to his last standing position, so this allows us to mess around and have Shaggy fly far distances. There's actually a small bug in the way the game scales enemies' sizes. For example, the sea creature model is very large, so the developers scale the model down in-game to 80% of the original size. This usually works, but there's an issue that occurs if the enemy doesn't start out in the level. When an enemy is spawned in using the respawn event, such as when jumping out of a crate, then the scale accidentally happens twice. So the sea creature becomes 80% smaller, and then 80% smaller again. Some animations have their own scale parameter, and bring her back to normal size, but if you continually stun the enemy without letting her animate, then you can keep a mini sea creature around as long as you want. So that was all 74 of my useless Night of 100 Frights facts. I hope you enjoyed, and found these facts at least somewhat interesting. If you enjoyed this game and content around it, then I'm going to be uploading much more frequently from now on. That's all for this video, thanks for watching.